When my son slammed the van door and drove off, I finally understood what he thought of me. A burden. The Maplewood nursing home smelled like bleach and wilted flowers, the kind of place people came to wait for time to finish. They thought I'd cry or beg to go home. But I didn't. I just smiled and let the nurse push my wheelchair inside. Let them think they'd gotten rid of me. They didn't know this home used to be mine, built with my own hands, long before they were even born. The nurse wheeled me past a row of tired faces. Some watched the television with blank eyes. Others stared into space like time had forgotten them. I kept my hands folded on my lap, pretending to be calm. Inside, my heart burned. Every creak of the floorboards, every chipped tile, was a reminder of what this place used to be. I had picked those tiles myself once. Now they looked as broken as the promises my children made when they said they'd take care of me. I swallowed hard and said nothing. Daniel didn't even look back when he handed over the papers. He just said, "She'll be fine here," and left. His wife, Marla, avoided my eyes the whole time. Maybe guilt had found her for a second, but it didn't last. I watched them drive away through the window, their car disappearing down the street. The nurse tried to comfort me, telling me to rest and get settled in. I nodded politely, but all I could think about was how blind they were to what they'd just done. They placed me in room 112, a small space with beige walls and a faint smell of disinfectant. My bed was neatly made, and a single framed picture of flowers hung crookedly above it. I looked around slowly, studying every corner. The logo on the wall caught my eye, an oak tree with spreading roots. My oak tree, the one I had drawn on a napkin 30 years ago when I dreamed of building a home for elders with dignity. I smiled to myself. They had no idea whose shadow they were living under. I unpacked my small bag, folding each dress neatly into the dresser drawer. A nurse popped in to explain meal times, medication schedules, and activity hours. She spoke fast, as if reading from a script. I thanked her, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was tracing the layout of the halls, trying to remember what had changed. The dining room had moved. The garden outside was smaller now, and the warmth that once filled this place had vanished, replaced by rules and tired smiles. I knew then that something deeper was wrong here. As I rolled through the corridor later, I heard laughter from behind the counter. Two young nurses were gossiping, mocking one of the residents for repeating stories. I stopped for a moment. Unseen around the corner, their words were sharp, careless. I felt my chest tighten. When I built Maplewood, I wanted every person to feel safe, not mocked. That laughter echoed in my ears long after they left. I gripped my wheelchair's armrest and whispered to myself that this place had forgotten its heart. But I hadn't. Dinner that night was gray mashed potatoes and cold peas. I watched as residents waited long minutes for help cutting their food, while staff hurried around pretending not to see. I had once trained my employees to serve with patience, to look every resident in the eye. Now no one looked at anyone. My plate went untouched. I saw one woman spill her water, and no one came. I wheeled myself over and helped her clean it up. She smiled faintly. "You're new here," she said. I smiled back. Not exactly. Later that night, as the lights dimmed, I sat near the window and stared at the faint reflection of the courtyard lights. I could almost see my younger self standing out there, giving instructions to workers, deciding where to plant the oak tree. My late husband, George, used to call me stubborn for insisting on doing everything myself. Maybe I was. But this home had been my dream, my legacy. Seeing it like this made something twist inside me. I promised myself that whatever had gone wrong here, I'd find it. Morning came with the sound of rolling carts and squeaky shoes. My roommate Betty woke up coughing softly. She looked fragile, her white hair tangled against her pillow. We exchanged quiet smiles. She told me she'd been here for a year. Her children never visited. I nodded, understanding too well. When she said the staff didn't listen much anymore, I stayed silent, just listening. Sometimes, silence tells more than words. Betty's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "You get used to being invisible." I squeezed her hand gently. Not to me. The administrator, Mr. Collins, came in mid-morning to meet the new resident. His smile was wide but hollow. the kind people use when they want something. He shook my hand quickly and moved on to talk to a nurse about numbers and cost efficiency. His tone made my stomach turn. I had known men like him before. Men who saw homes like this as businesses, not sanctuaries. He barely looked at the residents, and when his eyes brushed over me, he didn't recognize me at all. I made sure of it. That afternoon, I explored the hallways, pretending to be lost. The floors had new tiles, but the walls carried the same faint cracks beneath the paint. I ran my hand along the rail and felt the same grooves from years ago. In one hallway, a framed photo of Maplewood's original founders hung crookedly. My face wasn't there. They'd removed it, only George's remained, his name spelled wrong beneath the picture. My chest tightened. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had erased me. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Not for long." At lunch, I saw the same pattern, staff rushing, trays slamming, residents ignored. Betty dropped her spoon, and it clattered loudly, but no one came. I picked it up, my hand shaking, not from age, but anger. The food was bland, the air heavy. A nurse scolded another resident for spilling soup. No patience, no kindness, just procedure. I chewed one bite and forced it down. This wasn't how it was meant to be. Every small cruelty here chipped at the soul of Maplewood, and I knew, sooner or later, I would have to act. That evening, as I was wheeled to the rec room, I noticed a nurse counting medication bottles under her breath. She looked nervous, her eyes darting toward the door. Something wasn't right. I made small talk, asking how long she'd worked there. 2 years, she said. Long enough to see what goes on. Then she stopped herself and changed the subject. I didn't press further, not yet, but her tone stayed with me, like a warning. I knew corruption when I heard it. I'd faced it before. This time, I'd end it quietly. That night, I wrote in my old notebook, the same one I'd kept since Maplewood's first day. My handwriting was slower now, but my thoughts were sharp. I listed what I'd seen: mistreatment, neglect, fear. I noted names, times, faces. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Every small observation would matter later. George used to say, "You can't fix what you don't understand." I understood now. This wasn't neglect by accident. It was by design. And whoever was responsible would learn that the founder they'd erased was still very much alive. Before sleeping, I stared at the ceiling and remembered George's voice. "Promise me, Maggie, this place will always stand for dignity." I had promised, and I'd failed. The thought stung, but not enough to break me. I closed my eyes and imagined the day we'd cut the ribbon, the smell of fresh paint, the laughter of the first residents. It had been a true home then. I fell asleep with that picture in my mind, knowing tomorrow I'd start peeling back the layers of what Maplewood had become. It was time to wake it up. The next morning, I was up before sunrise. The hallway was quiet, the air cool and still. I wheeled myself toward the front desk and glanced over the logs. No one noticed. It was poorly kept, sloppy. I smiled faintly. People who think no one's watching always get careless. I saw Colin's name scribbled on several expense sheets, marked personal supplies. I didn't need proof yet, just patterns. I tucked the information into memory and turned my chair. The new day had begun, and so had my plan to take back what was mine. The morning routine began with pills, breakfast trays, and chatter about television shows. I stayed quiet, watching how the staff moved. They were fast, but not careful. I noticed Betty's pills were handed to her without water. When she struggled to swallow, the nurse sighed and walked away. I reached for the cup and helped her drink. "You shouldn't have to do that," Betty whispered. "It's fine," I said softly, though inside I was boiling. I knew now this wasn't just poor management. It was neglect, dressed as efficiency, and it was everywhere. After breakfast, I joined the others in the rec room. Most of them sat in silence, staring at a muted TV. I started small conversations, asking their names, how long they'd been here, what they missed most. Their answers painted a clear picture: families who forgot them, staff who rushed, promises broken. One man said his room smelled like mold for months. Another said they ran out of fruit last week. I kept listening, letting every story settle in. I wasn't here to complain. I was gathering truth, one quiet word at a time. Later that day, I overheard two nurses whispering near the vending machine. They were talking about budget cuts and how Collins had bought a new car recently. Their voices dropped when they noticed me nearby. I acted confused, pretending I was just looking for the restroom. They smiled awkwardly and walked away. The moment they were gone, I wrote a note in my book. It wasn't much, but I'd learned long ago that corruption always leaves a trail. All I had to do was follow the smell of greed. It never hid for long. When I asked about the garden, a nurse told me it was closed for safety reasons. That was strange. The garden had been the heart of Maplewood, a place where residents used to plant flowers and feed birds. I wheeled myself to the back door anyway. A chain hung across the gate, rusted and crooked. Weeds had taken over the once beautiful beds. The benches I'd chosen years ago were broken and forgotten. I touched the fence gently. "They let you die too," I whispered to the flowers, already planning how to bring the garden back to life. That evening, Collins strutted through the halls, barking orders and smiling only when someone important passed by. I watched from the corner, pretending to nap in my wheelchair. He carried a clipboard, but never looked at the residents. He talked numbers, not names. When he passed by Betty's room, he wrinkled his nose and muttered something about messy old folks. I caught every word. He didn't know who I was, but that wouldn't last. Pride makes men like him sloppy, and I'd seen enough pride to know when it was about to crack. After dinner, I noticed the ceiling in the dining room leaking slowly into a metal bucket. A staff member walked past it 3 times without caring. I stared at the water dripping rhythmically, thinking about how everything decays when people stop caring. I'd once replaced that roof myself after a storm, determined to make Maplewood safe again. Now it looked like no one had done a thing in years. I rolled back to my room, my mind heavy. If the roof was leaking, it wasn't the only thing that had been left to rot. That night, I caught myself thinking about Daniel and Marla again. They probably thought I was sitting here, lonely and broken. In truth, I was more alive now than I'd been in years. I missed my old life. But I also realized something important. I'd spent decades fighting for dignity, for others, but I'd forgotten to defend my own. I wanted to believe they'd done this out of ignorance. Not cruelty, but a part of me knew better. I wasn't angry at them anymore. I was determined. If they'd forgotten who I was, I'd remind them. The next day, I heard laughter echoing from the staff lounge again. They were mocking an elderly man who'd spilled his coffee earlier. I stopped outside the door, listening. They imitated his shaking hands, laughing louder each time. Something in me snapped. I didn't burst in. I didn't scold them. I just memorized their names. There were better ways to bring people like that down. People like them never expected consequences, and that was their weakness. I returned to my room, calm on the outside, but carrying quiet thunder in my chest. At lunch, Betty told me her son hadn't called in months. She said it softly, like she didn't want to admit how much it hurt. I listened, letting her talk, until her voice trembled. It wasn't just her story. It was every person here, forgotten, waiting, pretending they didn't notice. I promised myself that when this was over, Maplewood would never make anyone feel forgotten again. I might have been left here against my will, but I would turn this place into what it was meant to be, starting with protecting people like Betty. Later that evening, a young nurse mentioned how food orders kept shrinking. "Collins says we need to stretch the budget," she said under her breath. I asked what that meant, and she shrugged nervously. "Canned meals, mostly." My stomach tightened. That wasn't saving money. It was stealing from residents' dignity. I watched her hurry away, afraid to say more. Fear had become the air people breathed here. I made another note in my book. Each page was now filled with small truths, but soon, those truths would form something much bigger and much louder. After dinner, a loud argument erupted between two nurses about missing medication. One accused the other of miscounting, but the fear in their eyes said something else. I listened quietly from my doorway. Collins arrived moments later, barking at them to handle it privately. His tone wasn't surprise. It was panic. He knew more than he wanted anyone to realize. As the hall cleared, I caught his eyes briefly. He looked through me, dismissing me as just another old woman. I smiled. Underestimating me was the first of many mistakes he'd make. I began paying attention to small details, the clock and sheets, the supply closets, even the food deliveries. Everything felt off. Shipments arrived at odd hours, some boxes half empty. I asked Leon, the janitor, about it. He hesitated before speaking. We used to get deliveries twice a week, now it's once every two. He looked around nervously. Collins says we're saving costs. I nodded slowly. Leon's eyes told me he didn't believe that either. It was clear now, someone was bleeding Maplewood dry for their own gain, and I intended to find out exactly who. That night I wheeled to my nightstand and opened the top drawer. Inside, hidden under tissues, was a small wooden carving, an oak tree, the same one that had inspired the logo. I traced its edges with my finger. I remembered carving it with George when we first dreamed of this place. I whispered, "We built something good. They won't ruin it." I placed it back carefully, as if setting a promise in stone. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but I felt calm. The storm was only beginning, and I was ready for it. Morning sunlight spilled into the room, and I decided it was time to start acting. I joined the others for breakfast and began asking quiet, careful questions. How long they'd worked here, how often Collins came around, who handled the books. Most shrugged or avoided the topic. But Leon was different. He hesitated, then said, "Things changed after Mrs. Parker left. I knew that name. She was my former head nurse. I asked where she went, and he whispered, 'Collins fired her last year.' My suspicions hardened into certainty. This wasn't mismanagement, it was sabotage." Leon and I started talking more during his cleaning rounds. He told me about his missing paychecks, how he'd been promised raises that never came. His face showed years of quiet defeat. I asked him why he stayed, and he said, "Because someone has to care for them." That answer struck me deep. It reminded me why Maplewood had begun. I told him softly, "You're the kind of person this place was built for." He didn't understand what I meant yet, but soon he would. I needed his help, and I knew he'd give it. That afternoon, I rolled by the office and saw Collins through the window, arguing on the phone. His face was red, his hand gripping a paper tightly. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught bored and audit. He slammed the phone down and locked the drawer. He was hiding something, maybe several somethings. I stayed until he left for a meeting, then noted the time. He always left his office at the same hour. I smiled faintly. Patterns reveal everything. I didn't need to break rules to win. I just needed to watch long enough. A week passed, and I started noticing how much the staff avoided Collins. They didn't want to cross him. Even Clara, one of the senior nurses, lowered her voice whenever his name came up. I overheard her telling another nurse, "He's untouchable. He knows people." That made me laugh quietly to myself. I knew people too, people who once ran this entire operation, people who still owed me favors. I might be in a wheelchair now, but my reach went further than any of them remembered. It was time they started remembering. One evening, the fire alarm went off, suddenly, blaring through the halls. Residents panicked. Staff rushed in confusion, and I watched as chaos spread. No one followed proper procedures. Some residents were left behind. Others wandered scared. I helped calm Betty and two others while the alarm kept ringing. After 20 minutes, someone finally announced it was a malfunction. Collins showed up late, pretending to take charge. I saw it for what it was, a warning. Maplewood wasn't safe anymore. Not physically, not morally, and I wasn't going to let it fall apart. Later that night, as everyone settled down, I found Leon sweeping near the dining hall. His face was pale from the chaos earlier. "No drills, no training," he said softly. "If there was a real fire, half of them wouldn't make it." I nodded. "And Collins?" He shook his head. "He blamed the alarm company. That told me everything. The man never accepted responsibility for anything." I told Leon to rest, but inside, I was more certain than ever. It was time to dig deeper, even if it meant breaking a few of my own rules. The next day, I saw Collins holding a clipboard again, walking with a forced smile beside a visitor in a suit. They stopped by the front desk, pretending everything was fine. I stayed in the corner, unnoticed, listening. The man in the suit asked about funds allocation. Collins laughed it off, saying everything was under control. But I caught the flicker in his eyes, the nervous way he adjusted his tie. Lies always had a rhythm, and his were beginning to sound desperate. He didn't know it yet, but his time was running out. That night, I decided to look for more proof. Leon gave me a spare key to the maintenance room, which connected to the office through an old door that hadn't been used in years. When the halls went quiet, I wheeled myself there and waited for his signal. He nodded, keeping watch near the corner. My hands shook as I turned the key. Inside, dust covered everything, but the drawers weren't empty. Files, receipts, and letters, all stamped with Colin's signature. I smiled. The truth was no longer hidden. It was right where I'd left it. I copied what I could, slipping papers into my sweater pocket. Most were expense reports. Supplies paid for but never delivered. Names of companies that didn't exist. It was worse than I imagined. Collins wasn't just neglecting Maplewood. He was stealing from it. My heart raced as I heard footsteps in the hall. Leon coughed loudly, distracting whoever it was. I hid the papers under my blanket when I got back to my room. I'd built this home on honesty. Now I'd use truth itself to bring the thief down. But not yet. Not until the perfect moment. Days passed, and Collins started acting jumpy. He began checking the office more often and yelling at staff for small mistakes. It was clear he knew something was off. I kept my head down, acting frail and harmless. People always reveal themselves faster when they think you're weak. Leon stayed cautious, watching from afar. He told me quietly, "He's getting suspicious." I nodded. "Then we're close." The tension in the halls grew, but so did my resolve. Maplewood might have lost its heart, but I was ready to give it a new one. On Sunday morning, Betty asked me why I seemed so calm lately. I told her. "Because peace comes when you know the truth." She smiled weakly, not understanding what I meant. I didn't explain. The staff seemed nervous that day. Collins had called for a surprise meeting. Through the thin walls, I heard shouting and the word audit again. When they left, the fear on their faces confirmed everything. The board must have started asking questions. Collins' empire of lies was trembling, and I was there to watch every crack spread. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wheeled to the hallway and stared at the framed picture of George again. His eyes looked calm, kind, proud. "I'm close, George," I whispered. "I'm bringing it back." For a moment, I thought I heard a faint creak from the old oak outside, as if it answered me. The building felt alive again, awake, for the first time in years. I went back to my bed, clutching my notebook. Tomorrow, I'd move from watching to acting. Collins wouldn't see it coming, but he'd never forget it once it arrived. The next morning, the staff buzzed with uneasy energy. Collins' voice echoed down the hall, loud and angry. He was on the phone again, pacing back and forth. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. "Inspection, short notice. We're not ready." I smiled quietly to myself. The walls were closing in on him. While everyone scrambled, I wheeled into the recreation room, pretending to be oblivious. From the window, I could see him outside smoking nervously. He'd built his house of lies too tall, and now it was starting to wobble. Later that day, Clara scolded a young nurse for serving the wrong meal to a diabetic resident. It was chaos. I watched her frustration boil over, but something about her voice caught my attention. It wasn't anger. It was fear. When she left the room, I followed her into the hallway. "He's cutting corners everywhere," she muttered under her breath, thinking I couldn't hear. "We'll all get blamed." I didn't say a word. I simply noted her reaction. Even the ones who used to defend Collins were starting to crack. Fear turns loyalty to survival quickly. After lunch, I rolled into the hallway and found Betty sitting alone, staring at her untouched tray. "No appetite?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Food's cold again." I pushed her tray away and offered her a cookie from my drawer. She laughed softly, saying I was spoiling her. I told her she deserved better than cold food and empty promises. Her eyes brightened for a moment, like she believed me. That moment mattered more than she knew. I didn't just want to take Maplewood back. I wanted to give its people hope again. That night, I dreamed of the first residents we ever welcomed into Maplewood. I saw their faces, heard their laughter. When I woke up, I felt both comforted and angry. Collins had turned that joy into fear. I wrote another page in my notebook, listing what I'd learned so far. Then, I paused, wondering what George would tell me if he were still here. He'd probably say, "Do what's right, not what's easy." So I decided the next step. I wouldn't just observe anymore. It was time to bring someone else into the truth. I found Leon mopping near the entrance. His shoulders slumped. "Rough day?" I asked quietly. He sighed. "Collins cut the cleaning staff hours again. He says we're over budget." I could see exhaustion in his face, the kind that never leaves. I told him there were ways to make things right, if he was willing to take a small risk. He looked nervous, asking what I meant. "Just pay attention," I said softly. "Notice what others ignore." He nodded slowly, not understanding fully. I smiled. Seeds of courage always start small. He'd learn soon enough. The next day, Leon told me the supply truck had come early and left too fast. Half the boxes weren't even unloaded. "He signs the papers before they're done," Leon whispered. "Says he'll handle the rest later." That was the missing piece. I wrote it all down, every time, every date. But something unexpected happened that afternoon. When I opened my nightstand drawer, an old bus ticket slipped out from under my notebook. It was from 1999, the trip George and I were supposed to take before he passed. I stared at it for a long time. That small ticket brought a flood of memories. We'd planned to travel across the coast after retiring, but instead, we built Maplewood. "We'll see the world later," he'd said. "Right now, let's build something that matters." I smiled through the sting of tears. Maybe this was my second chance to finish what we started. Not by traveling, but by saving the home we loved. I placed the ticket inside my notebook as a reminder that unfinished dreams still had purpose. That single piece of paper gave me back a strength I thought I'd lost. By late afternoon, I began writing letters. 3 of them. One for an old lawyer friend who'd handled Maplewood's paperwork years ago, one for the local inspector's office, and one for the last known board member I could trust. I didn't include too many details, just enough to raise questions. Leon watched curiously as I sealed the envelopes. "You're mailing those?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "Timing is everything." I tucked them beneath my pillow. Collins might control this place for now, but I still owned the truth, and soon that would be enough. The next morning, I noticed familiar faces missing. 2 nurses were gone, replaced by new ones who didn't look comfortable. Leon told me quietly that Collins had fired several people last week. He said they weren't performing, Leon explained. But I could see the fear behind his words. It wasn't about performance. Collins was cutting anyone who might talk. I leaned closer. "Then we'll talk louder." He didn't understand yet, but soon he would. People like Collins always believed silence was power. They never understood how much louder quiet people could become when pushed. That evening, I sat by the window and watched rain fall against the glass. The sky was gray, the courtyard soaked, but it didn't bother me. I let the rhythm calm me. I thought of George in the early days again, the laughter, the hope. Sometimes, peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from remembering why you started. The smell of wet earth drifted in, faint but familiar. For a few minutes, I wasn't angry or tired. I was just here, holding on to the reason I built Maplewood, to give people peace when the world forgot them. The next day, Leon came running to me, whispering that the kitchen had run out of bread. Collins told them to stretch the meals another 2 days, he said. I clenched my jaw. "Stretch them how?" "By serving smaller portions," he replied. I nodded slowly. That confirmed it. Collins was cutting costs and pocketing the difference. I told Leon to write down the delivery company's name. Next time he saw the truck, his eyes widened. "You're really going after him, aren't you?" "I already am," I said. "We just haven't reached the loud part yet." Collins strutted through the halls that afternoon, bragging to someone on his phone about how smoothly things were running. I watched from the corner of the common room as he laughed too loud, trying to hide his nerves. Even his smile looked stretched now. When he walked away, I whispered to Leon, "He's worried." Leon asked how I could tell. People who feel safe don't talk that much, I said simply. I'd spent my life reading people. Collins wasn't a mystery anymore. He was just another man who thought money could buy invisibility. At dinner, a nurse named Sandra dropped a tray near my chair. She sighed loudly, muttering that she was too tired to care anymore. I asked her gently, "Why stay here if it makes you so unhappy?" She looked at me with tired eyes. "Because nowhere else will take me." I nodded slowly. That answer broke my heart more than the rest. Collins had drained more than the budget. He'd drained hope. I promised myself that when this ended, people like Sandra and Leon would know that Maplewood still had a heartbeat. I'd make sure of it. Later that night, Clara came into my room, pretending to check vitals. Her tone was sharp. "You've been asking too many questions," she said quietly. "Collins doesn't like that." I met her eyes calmly. "Then he should be careful what he hides." She froze, unsure how to respond. I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Clara. I'm just an old woman, remember?" She left quickly, and I heard her shoes squeak down the hall. I exhaled slowly. That confirmed what I suspected. Collins knew someone was onto him. He just didn't know it was the woman who built the walls around him. The next day, I saw the staff moving faster than usual, avoiding each other's eyes. Something was coming. I stayed by the window, pretending to read. But I was listening. I heard Collins' voice near the office. "Make sure no one talks to inspectors. One word, and you're out." My stomach turned, but I didn't react. Fear was his last weapon. It only worked if you believed in it. I looked outside at the dead garden, imagining it green again. Life always returns when rot is cleared away. Collins didn't realize his roots were already showing. That evening, I spoke to Leon quietly. "Do you still believe in this place?" He looked unsure. "I want to, but it's hard." I handed him my notebook. "Read it." He hesitated, flipping through the pages filled with names, dates, and details. His expression shifted from confusion to realization. "You've been documenting everything." I nodded. "And soon we'll use it." He stared at me, speechless for a moment. "Who are you really?" I smiled. "Just the woman who made this place what it was supposed to be." That night, for the first time, he called me ma'am. Leon started helping quietly. He'd notice delivery times, record who came and went, and pass me small notes wrapped inside napkins. It felt strange, working in secret again after so many years, but it also felt right. Every piece of evidence built a wall around Collins's lies. The staff began whispering about something happening soon. Fear was shifting into curiosity, and curiosity was dangerous for men like him. The quieter I stayed, the louder the truth grew. I'd built Maplewood on integrity, and now I'd rebuild it the same way, brick by quiet brick. Collins cornered me near the main hall one afternoon. His smile was fake, but his eyes sharp. "You've been busy," he said. I tilted my head, just adjusting to the place. He leaned closer. "Don't make trouble, Mrs. Moore. I don't tolerate trouble." I met his stare calmly. "Neither do I." He smirked and walked off, but I saw his confidence slipping. He was starting to wonder who I really was. I could feel the fear beneath his arrogance. He'd built his power on lies, but I had built mine on truth, and truth never shakes. That evening, Leon told me Collins had held another private meeting. "He's changing passwords, locking cabinets," he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Then he's afraid." Fear meant progress. I told Leon to act normal and wait. "Timing," I said, "is everything." He nodded, still nervous. I could see he wasn't used to this kind of resistance. But resistance is what keeps hope alive. Every locked drawer, every whisper, every panicked glance was proof that the tide was turning. Collins thought he was containing the storm. He didn't realize I'd been the one stirring the clouds. The next day, Collins called a meeting for the residents, pretending it was about upcoming improvements. His voice was all charm again. He promised new furniture, better meals, and updated facilities. The residents clapped weakly. I just watched him, noting how he never mentioned timelines or money. He was trying to buy time, to calm the noise he could no longer control, but it was too late. I'd already lit the first quiet spark. The moment the board caught wind of the truth, no promise or smile of his would save him. Leon found me later that afternoon, pale and shaken. He called me into the office, he said. Asked if I've been talking to anyone. I asked what he said. I told him no, but he doesn't believe me. I nodded, handing him a piece of candy from my pocket. Keep calm, he won't act yet. He's too scared of being watched. Leon frowned. How do you know? I smiled. Because that's what guilty men do. They start seeing ghosts in every shadow. I looked toward the office door. Let him chase shadows. We'll chase truth. That night, Leon brought me a stack of old forms from the storage room. They were dusty, untouched for years. As I flipped through them, I found something unexpected, my own signature, forged. I stared at the page for a long moment, feeling a mix of anger and relief. This was the proof I needed. Leon saw my face. Is that bad? He asked. For him, yes, I said quietly. For us, it's perfect. I folded the paper neatly into my notebook. The pieces were aligning faster than I'd planned. Collins had written his own ending. The next morning, Leon came to my room early, worry in his eyes. He's been asking about you, he whispered. Says you ask too many questions for a newcomer. I smiled faintly. Then he's closer to the truth than I thought. He looked panicked. Should we stop? No, I said firmly. If we stop now, everything we've done means nothing. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. For the first time, I saw courage replace fear in his expression. That was the moment I knew. Maplewood wasn't just waking up, it was finding its voice again. That afternoon, while Collins was out, Leon slipped into his office. I waited by the hall, pretending to knit. Minutes passed like hours. When he returned, his face was pale but determined. I found boxes of receipts, some fake company names, he said. My heart steadied. Good, we'll need copies. He nodded. I took photos on my phone. I smiled. Technology wasn't my strength, but progress didn't care about age. For the first time, I felt something electric in the air, a sense that justice was no longer a memory but a living, breathing force. That night, Leon and I sat quietly by the vending machine, pretending to share a snack. He asked softly, "Why risk it? You could have just kept quiet." I looked at him and said, "Because silence is what ruins places like this." He nodded, still thoughtful. The hum of the machines filled the space between us. I could see he was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoration. I handed him the old bus ticket. "Keep this safe," I said. "It's not just paper. It's the promise we still owe." We sat in silence for a while before I finally spoke. "It's time," I said quietly. Leon looked unsure. "Time for what?" "For Maplewood to remember who it belongs to." I handed him a small folded note with instructions. He read it quickly, eyes wide. "You want to expose him?" I nodded, with his own words. He nodded slowly, still afraid but willing. Every person has a breaking point, and Collins had reached his. We didn't need to shout. All we had to do was open the right door and let his lies walk out on their own. The next morning, I watched Collins strut down the hallway, whistling as if nothing could touch him. But arrogance has a way of leaving fingerprints. He didn't notice Leon following at a distance, watching when he unlocked the office safe. Collins wrote something down, tore a page from a ledger, and tucked it into his jacket. That was the piece we needed. The missing link between the fake companies and the real money trail. I didn't need to see it myself. Leon's memory was sharp, and I'd learned to trust him completely. The trap was nearly set. I remembered an old clause I'd included in Maplewood's founding agreement, one that gave me the right to audit operations at any time. No notice required. It was a safety net, George insisted on, just in case. I never thought I'd use it. Now it was my lifeline. I asked Leon to find the original copy in storage. It took him 2 days, but when he handed me the dusty file, I felt my heart race. The clause was still valid. Collins might think he ran Maplewood, but by law I still held the keys. That evening, Leon and I made our move. He kept watch near the door while I opened the file cabinet in Collins' office, using the old maintenance key. The drawers were packed with invoices, but one box stood out, marked, personal. Inside were receipts, checks, and signed approvals with my forged name. I placed the worst ones in my notebook and left the rest untouched. No one would believe an old woman's word alone, but hard evidence would speak for itself. When we left, the air felt lighter, like the building itself knew justice was finally breathing again. I hid the notebook under my pillow and tried to sleep, but my thoughts wouldn't stop. The home felt different that night. Alive, humming with quiet anticipation. I thought about everyone who'd trusted me long ago, all the residents who believed in Maplewood's promise. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for them, for every name written in the old registry. The moment I closed my eyes, I knew what had to happen next. Tomorrow I'd stop being quiet. Tomorrow the truth would no longer whisper. It would finally be heard. The following morning, I woke early to find Leon waiting by my door. "He's acting strange," he whispered, pacing, snapping at everyone. I smiled. Good. That means he feels it. I told him to stay close but out of sight. Collins had no idea how close the walls were now. Every step he took echoed through Maplewood, bouncing off the walls he'd corrupted. I watched him from the hallway as he barked orders and slammed papers on desks. The louder he got, the clearer it became. He wasn't in control anymore. Panic had taken over. By noon, everyone could feel the tension. Even the residents whispered about something happening. I could see the staff exchanging glances, their patience thinning. Collins yelled at a nurse for misplacing a form, his voice echoing down the hall. I wheeled by quietly, pretending not to notice. But I did notice something. He had a folder tucked under his arm, labeled "Pending Audit." My stomach tightened. He knew the board was coming. The clock had started ticking, and soon Maplewood would face the truth under the same light he'd used to hide it. That night, Leon slipped me a note written on a napkin. "He's been asking questions about your past." I smiled faintly. Then, "He's finally curious." Collins must have checked the records and found no mention of me. That was by design. When George died, I'd quietly removed my name from the public documents, staying only as a silent partner. It was the only way to protect what we built. Now that decision was paying off. He couldn't find me on paper, but soon he'd find me in person, and the truth would speak for itself. The next morning, Betty's bed was empty. The nurse told me she'd been sent to the hospital overnight after struggling to breathe. I felt a cold ache settle in my chest. I'd been so focused on the fight, I hadn't noticed how sick she'd become. When I asked why no one called her family, the nurse shrugged. Collins said it wasn't necessary. I stared at her, speechless. I knew then that this wasn't just about money anymore. His neglect was costing lives. That was the final line for me. There would be no forgiveness after this. I sat by Betty's empty bed, my hand resting on her blanket. The room felt hollow without her voice. "Hold on, Betty," I whispered. "You'll come back to something better." I closed my eyes for a moment, hearing George's voice in my memory. Steady, patient, certain. Do what's right. I took a deep breath and opened my notebook. Every note, every page, was proof that this wasn't just negligence. It was betrayal. The kind of betrayal that demanded action. I didn't care if Collins found out now. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was reclaiming my home. That afternoon, I watched from the hallway as Collins greeted a visitor in a crisp suit. They spoke quietly, but I could catch enough words to understand. It was damage control. He was trying to cover up Betty's transfer, blaming a paperwork issue. My hands clenched. Even in crisis, he lied without hesitation. Leon whispered, "He's digging deeper." I nodded. Let him. The deeper he digs, the easier it'll be to bury him in his own words. Collins thought he was fixing problems, but all he was doing was tightening the noose around himself. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed, I rolled into the courtyard and stared at the old oak tree. Its branches were thinner now, but still strong. It had survived storms, neglect, and time itself, just like me. I thought of Betty, of the others who couldn't fight for themselves. "We're going to fix it," I whispered to the tree. The wind brushed through the leaves softly, like an answer. That was enough to remind me I wasn't alone. Sometimes the past doesn't fade. Sometimes it waits patiently for you to finish what you started. When I returned inside, Leon was being yelled at near the nurse's station. Collins accused him of slacking off, claiming the floors weren't cleaned properly. I saw the fear flash across Leon's face, but he stood tall. "I do my job," he said quietly. Collins stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threat. Watch yourself. I watched the exchange without interfering, though every part of me wanted to step in. Leon caught my eyes as Collins walked away. I nodded at him, proud. For the first time, Leon didn't bow his head. He stood his ground. Later, Leon found me in the hallway, whispering that Collins had locked the office again. He's hiding something, he said. He's always hiding something, I replied. Leon hesitated, then said, "What if he fires me?" I smiled gently. "Then you'll be free before he falls." He didn't smile back, but I saw understanding in his eyes. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled him. We had both crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Maplewood had become more than a home again. It was a fight worth finishing, and we were almost there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the rain streak down the glass. The courtyard lights flickered softly. I reached for the bus ticket tucked in my notebook. George's handwriting was faint, but still visible. "One day we'll go," it said. I smiled weakly. Maybe this was the journey after all. Not through cities or mountains, but through truth. The smell of rain filled the room, calm and grounding. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Tomorrow, everything would change. I just didn't know how big the storm would be. Morning arrived with tension thick in the air. Collins stormed through the hallway, shouting orders. "Inspections next week," he barked. He looked tired, sweat glistening on his forehead. Leon whispered, "He's losing control." I nodded. "Let him panic. It helps us." I wheeled myself into the dining hall and sat near the front. I wanted to see his face, the way his mask cracked. When our eyes met, I smiled politely. That rattled him more than any argument could. Sometimes silence is the loudest threat of all, and I'd learned how to use it well. That afternoon, Collins called the staff into a meeting behind closed doors. Through the thin walls, I heard fragments tighten security. No visitors without clearance, confidential files. He was sealing every door he could, but the problem was already inside. The residents began whispering, curious about the sudden tension. I stayed calm, offering comfort to those who looked afraid. When I returned to my room, I wrote one line in my notebook: "Fear is temporary, truth isn't." The more he tried to control the story, the more the story slipped through his fingers. The next morning, while Collins was distracted, I wheeled into the office and used the administrator's phone. My hands trembled as I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, the lawyer from our founding days. When his voice came on the line, calm and surprised, I said only one thing: "This is Margaret Moore. I'm invoking the audit clause." Silence followed, then a slow, respectful tone. "Understood, Mrs. Moore." I hung up before Collins returned. My heart pounded. It was done. The call that would change everything had already been made. When Collins discovered the phone off the hook later, I saw confusion in his eyes. He checked the log, frowning. I watched from a distance as realization began to dawn. His hand shook slightly as he set the receiver down. He knew someone had called an outside number, but he didn't know who. I kept my expression neutral as he scanned the room. His gaze brushed over me and moved on. He still saw only an old woman. That blindness, the same arrogance that ruined this place, would be the reason he lost it. That afternoon, I joined the residents for tea in the common room. The atmosphere felt lighter somehow, though no one could explain why. Leon sat nearby, his posture relaxed for the first time. "Feels different today," he whispered. "It's the air," I said. "It smells like change." He smiled faintly, still unaware that the board had already received the message. By this time tomorrow, they would be preparing the surprise inspection. Collins thought he still had control, but Maplewood was already shifting under his feet. Every quiet truth had finally started to speak. Collins must have sensed something, because he called another emergency staff meeting that evening. His voice carried down the hall, angry, panicked. "No one talks to outsiders," he shouted. His words came out cracked, uneven. I stayed near the door, listening as he blamed everyone but himself. He ranted about loyalty, about discipline, about control. It was almost poetic, watching a man drown in the lies he built. When the door opened and the staff rushed out, their faces were pale but relieved. Fear was no longer working. His control had finally begun to crumble. The next morning, I woke to find the hall strangely quiet. No shouting, no tension. It was eerie, like the calm before a storm. I wheeled toward the lobby and found Collins pacing, muttering to himself. Papers were scattered across the counter, his jacket tossed aside. When he saw me, he froze. "What are you looking at?" he snapped. "Just admiring how busy you are," I said lightly. He glared, then turned away. His voice shook as he called someone on the phone. The panic was spreading faster than I could have hoped. By noon, word spread that the board was sending inspectors. Collins tried to act calm, assuring the staff it was just routine, but everyone could see his hands trembling. Leon passed me a folded note. "They'll be here in 3 days." I read it quietly, hiding my smile. The clock was ticking now. Every dishonest form, every missing dollar, every cruel decision would finally be laid bare. I looked around the dining hall at the residents, at the faces that deserved better. 3 days, I whispered to myself. 3 days and this place breathes again. Collins tried to repair his image fast. He ordered fresh paint for the lobby, demanded staff wear new uniforms, and even arranged flowers near the entrance. But desperation isn't the same as care. The residents saw the sudden change for what it was, fear dressed up as kindness. I watched him direct everyone with shaky confidence, pretending to lead. He looked powerful, but I saw through it. Power built on lies always collapses when the truth walks through the door, and soon the truth was coming, wearing a badge, holding a clipboard, and carrying my name. That night, I sat by my window again, the moonlight soft across the floor. The air was still, heavy with waiting. I held the old oak carving in my hand, tracing its smooth edges. "Almost there, George," I whispered. "Almost home again." Down the hall, Colin's voice echoed faintly as he argued on the phone, one last time. He still thought he had time. He didn't realize that Maplewood had already chosen its side, and it wasn't his. The next sunrise would begin the reckoning, and this time, I wouldn't be watching. I'd be leading it. The morning before the inspection, the air felt electric. Everyone moved faster than usual, cleaning surfaces that hadn't been touched in months. Collins barked orders at anyone who passed. "Make it perfect," he shouted, though his voice cracked halfway through. I sat quietly in the lobby, watching him panic. It was poetic, in a way, seeing him race to polish a place he'd already ruined. Leon passed by with a mop, meeting my eyes briefly. He didn't need words. We both knew what was about to happen. The truth wasn't coming quietly anymore. The residents whispered to each other in low tones, sensing that something important was happening. Clara paced nervously near the nurse's station. Even the usual chatter from the TV room had gone silent. Colin's false charm was starting to slip. He smiled too wide, laughed too loud, his nerve showing in every move. I rolled past him on purpose, just to watch his confidence falter. "Morning, Mr. Collins," I said sweetly. He forced a nod and walked away. He still didn't realize how close he was to being replaced by the very people he looked down on. That afternoon, Leon quietly handed me his phone. "I backed up all the photos," he whispered. "Invoices, receipts, fake companies, everything." I nodded, feeling the weight of his trust. "Good work," I said softly. We sat in silence for a while. Neither of us needed to say what came next. The board's arrival would decide everything. I looked at the notebook on my lap, worn and full. Every page carried a piece of Maplewood's truth. "We've done enough," I said. "Now we let the light do the rest." Leon smiled faintly. "Then we're ready." When the inspection van pulled up the next morning, Collins looked pale. He tried to greet the team with his usual charm, but his voice was uneven. The inspectors wore calm, professional faces. I recognized one of them from years ago, a man who'd attended our opening ceremony. He didn't recognize me yet, and I wanted it that way. I stayed near the entrance, pretending to read a magazine. Leon whispered, "It's starting." Collins guided them inside, his smile twitching. I closed my eyes briefly and whispered, "Let the walls speak," and they did. The inspectors moved through the building, taking notes and asking quiet questions. Residents spoke freely for the first time in years. One told them about the bad food. Another mentioned how the staff had been cut. Clara tried to stay professional, but her hands shook. Collins followed the team nervously, interrupting every few minutes to explain away their findings. I stayed in the background, watching him unravel. The building seemed to echo his downfall, the hum of truth in every hallway, the quiet courage returning to faces that had forgotten what hope looked like. By noon, the inspectors asked for access to the administrative office. Collins hesitated before unlocking the door. "Some files are confidential," he warned. They didn't care. They began opening drawers, flipping through folders, scanning papers. I could see the sweat form on his forehead. One inspector frowned, holding up a document. "These signatures don't match." Collins tried to laugh it off. "Old hands," he said, waving it away. But his voice broke. That was it. The sound of a man losing his grip. Lies always end in silence, and his voice was almost gone. I wheeled forward slowly, pretending to be curious. "Is everything all right?" I asked innocently. The inspectors turned toward me politely. But Collins' face went white. "Mrs. Moore," he said, voice tight. It was the first time he'd used my name correctly. I smiled. "That's right. Margaret Moore." The inspectors looked between us, confused. "You two know each other?" one asked. "Not well," I replied. "He's only been borrowing my home." Collins' jaw dropped. The room went still. For the first time, every secret, every lie, every theft had a witness with a name that mattered again. Collins stammered, trying to recover. "She's confused," he said. "She's a resident. And the founder," I interrupted calmly. "My husband and I built Maplewood 30 years ago. Every beam, every chair, every promise." The inspectors' faces changed instantly. I handed them my notebook and the forged documents Leon and I had collected. "You might want to start here," I said. Collins tried to grab the papers, but one inspector stopped him cold. The moment felt almost still. For years he'd taken everything that wasn't his. Today I took it all back in one breath. The inspectors flipped through the evidence quietly, their expressions darkening. Collins stood frozen, his hands trembling. "This is a misunderstanding," he tried again, but his voice cracked. I sat silently, letting the truth work. Every stolen dollar, every corner he'd cut, it was all there. One inspector finally looked up. "Mr. Collins, we'll need you to step aside while we investigate." His mouth opened, but no sound came. He was done. I watched without gloating. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right. And Maplewood, my Maplewood, was finally standing tall again. As the inspectors escorted him from the office, the halls grew quieter. The staff peeked out from doorways, whispering. The residents watched from their chairs. Collins' confident stride was gone. His eyes darted everywhere but toward me. Leon stood near the end of the hall, arms crossed. When Collins passed him, Leon didn't move aside. For the first time, the man who'd ruled by fear looked small. When the doors closed behind him, a deep stillness settled over the home. It wasn't fear anymore. It was relief. The weight that haunted Maplewood had lifted. The inspectors stayed the rest of the day, taking statements and gathering records. Clara came to me afterward, her eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know it was this bad," she said softly. I nodded. "Now you do. Do better." She promised she would. The staff moved carefully, unsure of what came next. But the residents smiled more that evening. The food was warm, the air lighter. Leon told me quietly, "It feels different now." I looked around the room. "It's supposed to," I said. "This place was built for peace, not profit." Later that evening, an inspector approached me privately. "Mrs. Moore," he said respectfully, "you never told anyone you still owned this place." I smiled. "Ownership means nothing if you forget what it's for." He nodded, understanding more than I expected. "The board will want to speak with you," he added. "They'll need guidance." I looked around the quiet halls and nodded slowly. "I'll be here." He left with a grateful smile. It felt like the first real conversation in years. No lies, no power games, just truth. For the first time, Maplewood breathed freely again. When word spread that Collins had been removed, the entire building seemed to change overnight. The staff no longer whispered, they laughed. The residents sat closer together at dinner. Leon hummed while cleaning, his shoulders relaxed. Even Clara seemed lighter. I sat by the front window, watching the evening sun fall through the trees. It painted the walls gold again, just like it used to. George would have loved it, I whispered to myself. We did it. For a moment, I could almost hear his reply, carried through the hum of life returning to this home. By the next morning, the board members arrived, all wearing serious faces. They gathered in the dining hall to meet me. I recognized one of them, Mr. Hayes, who had once approved the funding for Maplewood's expansion decades ago. Mrs. Moore, he said, shaking my hand gently. We owe you an apology, I smiled faintly. You owe them, I said, nodding toward the residents. I just reminded you why this place exists. They listened quietly as I explained what had gone wrong. Every word came not from anger, but from love. Maplewood was finally being heard again. Before the meeting ended, Mr. Hayes stood and said, We'd like to reinstate you as honorary director, Mrs. Moore, if you'll accept. I hesitated, glancing at Leon, who stood nearby, smiling proudly. I thought of George. Of the day we first opened these doors. I'll accept, I said. But only if the people here are treated like family again. They all nodded. I felt peace settle over me, slow and warm. After all these years, the promise we made was finally being kept. Maplewood's heart was beating again, stronger than before. If you've followed this far, you're probably wondering what happens to Margaret, to Maplewood, and to the family that left her behind. Stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. After the board left, the staff gathered quietly in the dining hall. Leon stood up and thanked everyone for their patience through the chaos. Clara apologized to the residents for how things had been handled. There was no bitterness in the room, just relief. I sat in my wheelchair near the window, listening. When they finished, I rolled forward. The worst is behind us, I said softly, but the work starts now. They all nodded, united in a way I hadn't seen before. Maplewood wasn't just surviving anymore, it was healing, one honest step at a time. Leon approached me later, nervous but smiling. They want me to take over as operations lead, he said. I smiled wide. Then say yes. He hesitated. I'm not qualified. You care, I said. That's qualification enough. His eyes softened, and he nodded. Watching him accept that role filled me with pride. It meant the home would have hands that cared again. George always said leadership was about heart, not power. Leon had both. As he walked away to start his new duties, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, for him, for Maplewood, for second chances. That night, the halls were filled with soft laughter. The residents played cards in the lounge, and the nurses moved without fear. I watched from the doorway, content. For years, silence had ruled this place, but now, sound was life again. I could almost hear George humming an old tune in my mind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Maplewood had come back from the edge, not because of rules or money, but because kindness had returned. And kindness, once planted, grows stronger than anything built on fear. The next morning, I visited the office one last time. It felt different, without Collins's presence. The air clear, the walls no longer heavy. I opened a drawer and found the old brass nameplate that once read Margaret Moore, founder. I wiped off the dust and set it gently back on the desk. I'd kept my promise to George, to myself, and to everyone who'd believed in this home. The journey wasn't about revenge. It was about remembrance. I smiled as sunlight hit the nameplate, making it gleam like new. Maplewood was mine again, right where it belonged. When I returned to the hall, the residents greeted me warmly. Betty's roommate hugged me, tears in her eyes. You saved us, she said. I shook my head gently. We saved each other. It wasn't just words. Every person here had played a part. Leon, Clara, even the residents who'd spoken up. The home wasn't perfect, but it was honest again. And honesty, I'd learned, was worth everything. As I rolled down the hall, I realized that sometimes you have to lose control to find your purpose again. I'd found mine here, among them. That afternoon, I went to the garden for the first time in months. The chain across the gate was gone. Leon had already cleared the weeds and set new soil. I watched as he helped a few residents plant flowers. Their laughter carried softly in the breeze. I picked a small seedling from the tray and pressed it into the earth with shaking hands. "Welcome back," I whispered. The garden was alive again. Birds perched on the fence, chirping as if to celebrate. Maplewood was growing again, not just in plants, but in spirit. When I came back inside, I noticed the dining room smelled different. Real food, warm bread, and fresh vegetables. Clara smiled as she served trays herself, saying, "We're doing things right now." I sat near the end of the table, watching everyone eat. No one rushed. No one was ignored. It was simple, but it mattered. Meals weren't just food, they were dignity. For the first time in years, Maplewood felt like home again. I took a small bite, savoring it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. That made it taste better than ever. Later that evening, I found Leon fixing the light in the hallway. "You should rest," I told him. He grinned. "Rest later, there's too much to do." His optimism reminded me of George's tired hands, but a heart that never quit. I left him to his work and rolled toward the main lobby. The oak carving I'd made years ago still sat on the table, cracked but intact. I ran my fingers over it and smiled. Maplewood had cracks too, but that's how the light came back in, imperfect, but beautiful again. As the day ended, I sat by the large front window. The setting sun painted the walls in soft orange light. Staff passed by, greeting me warmly. Residents waved from across the room. I looked out at the oak tree, its branches reaching toward the sky. I thought of everything this home had endured: neglect, corruption, and pain, and still, it stood. I whispered softly, "You made it." I wasn't sure if I was speaking to the building, to George, or to myself. Maybe all three. Either way, the words felt right. Peace had finally come home. Before heading to bed, I took one last walk through the halls, my hands brushing the rails as I moved. Every sound, the quiet laughter, the hum of life, felt like a song I'd been waiting to hear again. When I reached the old photo of Maplewood's opening day, I touched George's smiling face. "We did it," I whispered. "It's safe now." The air felt warm around me, gentle and alive. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just surviving in this place. I belonged again. Maplewood was whole, and so was I. The morning sun filtered through the window, brighter than usual. I woke with a calm heart, the kind that comes after a long storm. I dressed slowly, folding the blanket just as I always had, but this time the room didn't feel like a cage. It felt like home. The sounds of laughter drifted from the hallway, staff and residents moving together instead of apart. I took a deep breath and whispered, "This is what it was meant to be." The dream George and I started had finally come back to life. Later that day, I sat in the office, reviewing the new plans with Leon. Fresh paint for the rooms, weekly visits from families, fair pay for the staff. Every item on that list felt like a piece of Maplewood's soul returning. Leon looked overwhelmed, but proud. "We'll make it happen," he said. "No," I replied softly. "You will. This is your home now." He hesitated. "You're not leaving, are you?" I smiled. "No, Leon. But every home needs new hands to build its future." He nodded slowly, understanding the quiet meaning in my words. That afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. I recognized it instantly. Daniel's. My heart tightened, but I stayed where I was, watching from the window. He walked in looking nervous, his eyes darting around as if searching for someone to blame. "Mom," he said softly. "I heard what happened." I turned toward him, calm. "Did you?" He nodded, ashamed. "I didn't know you still owned this place." I looked at him for a long moment. "That's because you never asked." He didn't answer. For once, his silence felt heavier than all his excuses combined. Daniel sat across from me, fumbling with his hands. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We thought it was best." I listened, not angry, just tired. "Best for who?" I asked. He sighed, unable to look at me. "You've done well here," he said finally, as if trying to change the subject. "This place looks beautiful." I nodded. "It always was. You just never saw it." His eyes welled up slightly. For the first time, I saw the little boy who used to follow George around the garden, not the man who left me here. It softened something in me. "I can take you home," Daniel said suddenly. I smiled sadly. I am home, he frowned, confused. This place? You want to stay here? I looked around the warm living halls filled with voices and light. I built this for people like me, Daniel, people who need dignity, not pity. He looked down, realizing the weight of what he'd done. I didn't need to punish him. Life already had. I placed a hand on his arm gently. You'll understand someday, I said, when you finally learn what family truly means. He nodded, quietly broken. Daniel stood to leave, but he lingered at the doorway. Can I visit? He asked softly. I smiled. You can always visit, but don't come to fix what isn't broken. He managed a small laugh through the guilt. You sound like Dad. That made me pause. He'd be proud of you, Daniel said. I shook my head. He'd be proud of Maplewood. Daniel nodded, then turned to go. As he walked down the hall, I felt no bitterness, only peace. Some goodbyes don't hurt. They simply set things right, and this one finally did. After he left, I rolled through the corridors slowly, taking in every sound, the hum of conversation, the laughter, the steady rhythm of a home alive again. I passed the staff office and heard Leon assigning shifts, his tone firm but kind. I smiled proudly. He'd grown into a leader faster than I expected. When I passed the rec room, Betty's picture hung on the wall surrounded by flowers. The residents had done it themselves. I touched the frame gently. You'd like it now, Betty, I whispered. It finally feels like a family again. Later that afternoon, I joined the others for tea in the courtyard. The oak tree swayed gently in the breeze, its branches stretching wide. I looked up at it and thought of all the years it had watched over this place, the laughter, the pain, the renewal. Leon sat beside me, smiling. We're thinking of adding a small fountain here, he said. Something peaceful. I nodded. Good idea. Water reminds people to keep moving. He laughed softly. You really don't stop teaching, do you? I grinned. Only until people stop learning. We both laughed quietly. That evening, the residents gathered in the dining hall for a small celebration. Fresh flowers filled the tables, and the smell of baked bread floated through the air. Leon made a short speech, thanking everyone for their patience and strength. When he mentioned my name, the room filled with gentle applause. I didn't expect it, and it made my eyes sting. I just did what needed to be done, I said softly. The real heroes are sitting right here. The room went silent for a moment, not in sadness, but in quiet, shared gratitude. After dinner, Leon approached me with something wrapped in cloth. We fixed it, he said. I unwrapped it slowly. It was the old plaque from the front gate. My husband's name restored, polished, and gleaming again. I traced the letters with trembling fingers. George Moore, it read clearly now. My throat tightened. You didn't have to do this, I whispered. Leon smiled. We wanted to. I nodded, too moved to speak. The plaque wasn't just a name, it was a promise kept. After all these years, George's dream had found its way home again. The next morning, they mounted the plaque at the entrance. The whole staff stood watching as the sunlight hit it, turning the brass gold. I stayed near the front, holding my notebook in my lap. When the last screw was tightened, I whispered, "Welcome home, George." Leon stood beside me, quietly respectful. The residents clapped softly, some wiping tears. For them, it was a ceremony of renewal. For me, it was closure. Maplewood wasn't just a place anymore. It was alive again, carrying every memory, every lesson, every ounce of love we'd ever built into it. Days passed peacefully. The rhythm of life settled into something warm and steady. I spent my mornings in the garden, afternoons reading by the window, and evenings sharing stories with the others. There was no tension now, only trust. Sometimes I'd hear laughter echo from the halls and smile, remembering when silence filled those same walls. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It grows, little by little, and Maplewood had grown back into the home it was always meant to be. Every sunrise here felt like a thank you from the past to the present. One morning, I watched the residents planting flowers outside. The youngest nurse brought me a cup of tea and said, "You've changed this place forever." I smiled. "No, dear. I just reminded it who it was." She laughed and walked away, but her words lingered in my heart. Maybe she was right. Maybe every act of love leaves a mark, even when time tries to erase it. I sipped my tea slowly, feeling the warmth in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace with everything. As weeks went by, visitors began returning. Families who had stayed away now came more often. Laughter filled the halls again, not forced, but real. Children ran through the courtyard, chasing each other around the oak tree. I sat by the window watching them. Life had come back full circle. I thought of Daniel again. He hadn't visited since that day, but he'd sent flowers and a letter that simply said, "I understand now." That was enough. Sometimes love doesn't need words, it just needs time to learn how to speak again. One afternoon, I walked into the office and found Leon adjusting the framed sign behind the desk. "I think it's missing something," he said. I smiled. "What's that?" He stepped aside to reveal the new sign he'd made. It read, "Maplewood, a home with heart." My eyes welled with tears. "It's perfect," I whispered. He grinned. "It's what you made it." I placed my hand over the words, feeling their warmth. It wasn't just a slogan, it was truth. The heart that Maplewood had lost was beating again, and I could feel it in every corner. The days grew softer after that. The staff worked with care, the residents smiled freely, and the nights were peaceful. Sometimes, I'd wake in the middle of the night and listen to the quiet hum of the building, the sound of life, of safety. I'd whisper to the ceiling, "Thank you." I didn't know who I was thanking anymore, George, fate, or the home itself, but it didn't matter. Gratitude has no single direction. It simply fills you, and that night, it filled me completely, like a gentle reminder that all storms eventually end. One afternoon, I sat outside beneath the oak tree, while Leon and the residents worked nearby. The sunlight flickered through the branches, warm on my face. "You look happy," Leon said. I smiled. "I am." He nodded. "You've given this place a future." I looked up at the leaves swaying above us. "No, Leon. The people did. I just helped them remember." The breeze carried my words away, and I hoped George was listening somewhere. The world felt still for a moment, perfectly balanced between what had been lost and what had finally been found. That evening, I opened my notebook for the last time. Most of the pages were filled, but the final one was blank. I took a pen and wrote slowly, "Maplewood is whole again. We kept our promise." I closed the book gently and placed the bus ticket inside, pressing it between the pages. It didn't feel like an ending, but a continuation. I smiled, knowing that George's dream would live on long after me. Then I set the notebook on my nightstand, beside the small oak carving that had started it all. When I woke the next morning, the air felt different, still, peaceful. I sat by the window, watching sunlight filter through the trees. Leon knocked softly and brought me breakfast. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. He smiled and poured my tea. We talked quietly about the garden, the residents, and the future. As he left, he said, "You've made this place something special again," I whispered after him. We all did. The tea was warm in my hands, and I felt content. Whatever time I had left, it was enough. Later that day, I joined the residents for lunch. Betty had returned from the hospital, healthier and smiling. When she saw me, she laughed. "You really did fix this place," she said. I grinned. "I had help." We ate together, sharing stories like old friends. The room buzzed with life again, every corner filled with warmth. I looked around the table and thought, this is what home is, people caring for one another. For a brief moment, I could almost see George sitting beside me, smiling quietly. The feeling stayed long after the meal ended. That evening, I rolled to the garden once more. The flowers were blooming now, bright and alive. Leon had built a small wooden bench under the oak tree, with a brass plate on it. I leaned closer to read it. It said, "For Margaret and George Moore, who gave this home its heart." My throat tightened, and tears filled my eyes. I traced the letters gently. "You shouldn't have," I whispered. Leon smiled. "We needed to." I sat there for a long time, letting the breeze carry away everything that had ever hurt. It was peace, pure and simple. As twilight settled, the sky turned gold and violet. The residents began returning inside, their laughter fading softly. I stayed a little longer, watching the first stars appear. The oak tree rustled above me, its branches swaying in rhythm with the evening wind. I felt George there somehow, not as a memory, but as something real, something near. "We did it," I whispered. "They'll be okay now." The wind moved through the leaves, like a quiet answer. I smiled and closed my eyes, letting that sound become the final promise between us. When night came, I sat by my window one last time. The lights of Maplewood glowed softly below, every room alive, every soul safe. I thought of how far we'd come, from betrayal to rebirth. This wasn't a nursing home anymore. It was a living story, carried by everyone inside it. I felt a deep calm settle over me, the kind that comes only after fulfilling something larger than yourself. I whispered, "Thank you, Maplewood." The building didn't answer, but somehow, I knew it heard me. Some love doesn't fade, it simply becomes part of the walls. Later that night, I rested in bed with the windows slightly open. The cool air carried the faint sound of laughter from the garden. I smiled in the dark, holding the oak carving close. My breathing slowed, steady and peaceful. I thought of George, of the life we built, of every moment that led here. The world outside was quiet, but inside I felt full of memories, of purpose, of love. As my eyes grew heavy, the last thing I heard was the creak of the old oak tree, whispering softly like an old friend saying goodbye. The next morning, Leon found the room filled with sunlight. My notebook lay open on the table, the final page blank except for the bus ticket resting neatly inside. The oak carving sat beside it. He smiled through quiet tears and whispered, "Rest easy, Mrs. Moore." Outside, the staff gathered near the garden, unaware of the gentle goodbye that had just passed. The oak tree swayed in the morning breeze, its leaves shimmering in the light. For a moment the air carried a faint sound, a distant bell ringing softly, echoing peace across Maplewood.